Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today I thought I would take a look at a game played quite a while ago, back in 1976, but I think it's an excellent game for a number of reasons. I mean, one is, as you'll see, it's really just a beautiful game. For a long time it was a pretty famous one, although nowadays, I mean, enough water has gone under the bridge that probably most of my audience will be unfamiliar with it. It's also a very good game for illustrating some themes in a particular variation of the French defense, and I would say, broadly speaking, it shows some very important French defense themes. So let's take a look at this, and I think you'll find it quite interesting and instructive. So the game is Reshevsky against Raphael Vaganian, played in Skopje in 1976, as I mentioned. And at this point, Vaganian was a youngster. He was, well, not a kid, but he was in his mid-20s, while Reshevsky was still quite a seasoned veteran at this point, in his mid-60s, but still very, very strong. Okay, so we've got the French, Satirish defense, and then the line with knight to f6. So e5, knight f to d7. Now, the most popular variation nowadays, and I don't know if it was back then, but certainly it was known back then, was bishop to d3, c5, c3, knight c6, and then knight to e2. So a somewhat more modest approach. White doesn't try to grab every single possible square in the center with one of his pawns, but is content with the advantage in space that he's got at the moment, and simply wants to finish developing his pieces, get to a safe position, and take it from there. But there's also this very ambitious line with f4, and it's still playable. I mean, it still could be played, but it is a very dangerous line, to be sure. Okay, c5, c3, knight c6, and the problem here, well, okay, a slight problem. I mean, White would love to play, let's say, well, let me put it this way. White would love, ideally, to develop all of his minor pieces in some kind of ideal way, but he really can't. This bishop on c1 is locked in. If he plays knight e2 with the idea of then playing knight f3, well, this bishop on f1 gets locked in. So that's the advantage of playing bishop to d3 a few moves ago, is that White at least gets to put his minor pieces so that way they're not stepping on each other's toes. So this knight will come to e2. Okay, let me give a few more moves here. And from here, okay, Black plays cd, cd, and then f6. And here f4 is not very good. There's an old trap. F takes e5, f takes e5, and then knight takes d4 with the point that on knight takes d4, queen h4 check, and then queen takes on d4. So White can't quite get every single little thing that he wants in the game. So he can get his minor pieces to develop in a nice and happy way where they don't step on each other's toes, or he can play f4 safely, but he can't do both. So from here in this line, the main move is e takes f6. Knight takes f6, castles, bishop to d6, knight f3, and so on. Okay, and then here Black has three main moves, but we're not going to get into that theory. Alright, so back to f4. So c5, c3, knight c6, knight d to f3 is the move that White chose. So again, he's got to make some concession somewhere. This lets both of his bishops stay alive for the moment, and White is hoping that he can play bishop to d3 and then knight to e2 and get everything that he wants. But we'll see that this involves concessions as well. So here, Black played the move queen to a5, and one point of this is that it's trying to take advantage of a pin on this diagonal. So that way, if bishop to d3, well, Black can take, and White can't recapture because of that pin. So there are a couple of moves, at least, that can be played here. The move that Reshevsky chose was king to f2. But bishop to e3, I think, is more popular nowadays, and White seems to have done pretty well. So I was looking up games with high-rated players after bishop to e3, and in these games with at least one and often two high-rated players, White has done very well. Now there's a game between Istratescu against Del Rio Angeles, played in Capella Legrand in 1998, where Black played f6. Usually Black played c takes d4, but in this game Black played f6, And I think this is an okay move. White went on to win that game, but well later, 49 moves. So f6 I think is worth consideration. So c takes d4 is the main move though, and then knight takes d4, knight d4, bishop d4, and here, at least in games with high-rated players, black has tried at least 3 moves here. In a game between Horesic and Costin, so Costin is a well-known British GM who lives in France as well. He played knight to b8, and after knight f3, okay, he played bishop d7, bishop to d3, and white was only a 2355 player. I mean, certainly not a bad player, but definitely lower rated than Costin, who's a grandmaster. Went on to win in only about 31 moves. So, and here I'd say white is a little bit better. So that was played in a 1998 tournament. Knight to c6 was played in a game between Dragan Solak and Kosirov, both well over 2,500, a couple of GMs, played in an internet tournament in 2002, and white went on to win a very long game after bishop e3, bishop d7, bishop to d3. And again here, though, I think white is probably a little bit better. Okay, another move here instead of knight to b8 is b6. And this was tried in a game between Nigel Short and Gesser, played in Solingen in 1986, and Short won very quickly. And he definitely outrated his opponent, but the problem is after b6, black has just cut off his queen. So a4 takes advantage of this, and it's just not a good idea. The general idea is a logical one. Black wants to play bishop a6, swap off the light square bishops, put a rook on c8, and so on, but tactics comes first. Finally, queen of c8 was played by the highest rated player involved in any of these games. This was played by Zhang Pengzhang in Liverpool 2007 against David Howell. And Howell won with white in this one too. Bishop to d3, knight c5, bishop c2, a5, knight f3, bishop e7, queen e2. And I would say this position is actually equal, but Howell managed to grind him out in a very long game, 83 moves. So, generally speaking, white has done pretty well with bishop to e3. I don't know if it promises an advantage, but in many of the games, white has gained an advantage, and white has certainly been successful. Well, Reshevsky played king to f2, and this is not such an unusual idea. In fact, this kind of king walkabout is still pretty standard today. And the point of this is that white wants to maintain a pawn on d4 rather than a piece. So he gets out of the pin, and he's hoping that he can just play g3 and king g2 and simply sidestep all of the dangers with his king being a little bit exposed. All right, so here black played bishop to e7. b5 can also be played, going for queenside play, but Viganian tried a different plan. And here, I think white should have played g3, again with the idea of shuttling the king over to g2. Instead, Reshevsky played bishop to d3, which isn't maybe a big error yet, but it was, I think, more important for him to get his king out of the way quickly. Now, there was a later game between the great German grandmaster Robert Hübner, and Dutch GM Hans Rey, played in Wijk aan Zee in 1982. So 6 years after this game. So Hübner repeated this, and Rey did not did not follow in Viganian's footsteps, but played instead c takes d4, c takes d4, and f6. And in this game too, white got into big trouble. Here, as in the Reshevsky game, white should have played g3, getting the king out of the way, off the f-file, covered up, and also off the a7 g1 diagonal. But instead Hübner played knight to e2, and after queen b6, queen a4, castles, and king to g3. Okay, it's a little bit late. I mean, the problem is he can't play g3 anymore, because after f takes e5, we've got a pin on this diagonal, we've got a pin on the file. So after f takes e5, knight d takes e5, white is just lost. It's just game over here already with a crushing double attack hitting f3 and d3. So Hübner played king to g3, which is probably not ideal. Rey lashed out with g5, okay, queen c2, rook f7, and black is much better here. And after a3, which is rather a luxurious move. He wants to stop knight to b4, which is understandable, but the problem is that his king just can't survive this. So Ray played f takes e5, which is okay, but wasn't the best move. He was still winning for a long time, but Hübner managed to escape with a draw. But after g takes f4, Hübner is just dead. If he doesn't take with the bishop, then f takes e5 wins a pawn with just a huge advantage, a winning advantage. Well, it's winning no matter what, but I mean a very much decisive advantage. I mean, we're talking like 3-4 pawns up, that kind of thing. So bishop takes f4 is the only move that makes any sense as a try to resist. And then f takes e5, de, and then knight takes e5 is a killer. The point is that after knight takes e5, knight e5, if he doesn't take, he's just dead lost. A pawn down with a horrible position. And if he does take, well, queen f3 check, king h3 or king to g4, same thing. Queen h4 is checkmate. So this is an illustration of the kind of danger that white faces with his king out there, and why it's important to play g3 and get the king off the f-file, off the a7, g1 diagonal, as quickly as is practicable. So back to the game. So that was what we just looked at, was c takes d4, c d4, f6, and then queen b6, and so on. All right, in our game, in our main game, Reshevsky-Vaganian, black played queen to b6, so very logical move. Reshevsky played knight e2, and you can see, I mean, very optimistic. He wants all of his minor pieces to be developed ideally, and he wants f4 in, and he wants to be able to recapture on d4 with a pawn. And, you know, if you can get all this in, then fantastic. But it's not going to prove so easy. So now we start to hit the white center, f6. Okay, now here, at the time this game was played, e takes f6 was a novelty. So a couple of other possibilities. There's king to g3, and I don't think you'll be shocked to discover that this move got white into a lot of trouble. So g5, of course, we're trying to just blast this, just crack open this pawn center that white is trying to hide behind, and of course open lines against the white king. So rook e1, c takes d4, and in a game between Kostro and Wolfgang Ullmann, the great German grandmaster and French specialist, white played c takes d4. But I'm sorry, no, I apologize. This was not Kostro-Ullmann. This would have been a better way for white to play. So c takes d4, g takes f4, knight f4, fe5, de5, maybe knight c5. And black is better, but it's a very unclear position. I mean, despite the king's crazy location, it's not entirely easy to kill him. And probably white should just play h3 here and drop the king back. If rook to g8 check here, well, king h3 and then maybe g3 will hold the fort. So it's hard to believe at first that the white king can even survive here. But it seems that that's the case. Anyway, in this position, this is a game of Dorian Vaganian from Teesside in 1974, and white played knight e takes d4. Now Dorian is a very, very strong player. Was still fairly young at that point, so he wasn't at his full strength, but he was definitely probably a GM strength player at this point. In fact, he might have just been a GM, period. Anyway, he played knight e takes d4, and bad things happened to him too. So g takes f4, bishop f4, fe, knight e5, knight d takes e5, and here he probably still could have survived with bishop takes e5. He probably rejected this because of something like knight e5, rook e5, bishop to d6. But it turns out that queen h5 check holds everything. If the king goes to the f-file, then rook f1 check, and black is in trouble. And so let's say king to d8, queen g5 check works out, because on king d7 there's queen to g7 check. If the king goes to e8, then we just check on h5 again. And on king c7, then knight to b5 check, and then takes. And white is okay here. He's surviving here. But white was, I guess, afraid of ghosts here and played rook takes e5, sacking the exchange, but this was just no good. And in this position, black is just much better. I think just winning, or very nearly winning. He's up in exchange, and white's king is in trouble. So king to g3, it might be survivable. It might be playable technically, but it's ridiculously dangerous. A safer approach, and this was from the Kostro-Ullmann game from Zakopane or Zakopane, I'm not sure, 1974. So takes, and here I think knight e takes d4 is equal. C takes d4 is probably equal as well. So I think this is the way for white to go. Queen to b3, just trading the queens off. Black is fine after this, but white is certainly avoiding some huge potential danger. Well, Reshevsky played e takes f6, so he had no fear here. So he's getting out of the way of these f takes e5 and knight takes e5 ideas, but, well, surrendering the center is definitely a concession. So bishop takes f6, and here Reshevsky thought, okay, he has time, he played king to g3, no big deal. Takes, castles, and alright, we're already in new territory. As I said, e takes f6 was a novelty at the time, and only one game has followed in the Reshevsky-Viganian footsteps. You might even want to try to figure out what should white do in this position. Well, Reshevsky continued to play optimistically with the move rook to e1. So he'd like to, of course, have his rook putting pressure on the e file, certainly where the rook should be. But it would have been a more solid, a more sane move, more sane choice to play h3 with the idea of dropping the king back to h2. And this was played in a correspondence game, Hagloff against Hagström, in Sweden in 1979. And white went on to win a long game, 67 moves. But here I would say it's roughly equal. You know, maybe black is microscopically better, maybe not. But certainly it's a playable position for both sides. All right. Well, after rook to e1, Reshevsky is given no further amnesty. Well, actually, I take that back. He does have one last desperate way that he could have maybe held on, but it would have required a lot of only moves and wasn't easy to see at all. So after rook to e1, finally punishment is coming. I say finally, but it's only move 14, and white is already in huge trouble after this brilliant move e5. Okay, well here white has his very last chance with knight to c3, just ignoring this pawn. You know, if e4 knight takes d5 is the point, and after something like e takes f4, bishop f4, bishop d4, takes, white has knight takes d5. This is crucial. The clear tactical point is that if queen d5, there's bishop h7, and it's also very important that this knight protects f4, which was threatened. And after g5, white sacrifices a piece with this, and then check, and then queen g5, and then takes, and now the idea is that white has knight c7 hitting the rook, and if the rook moves, there's knight to e6 check. Black is maybe slightly better here, so white might be able to kind of adapt his idea with bishop to d6, hitting this rook, and after rook to g8, then playing knight to c7. And, for instance, a position like this is about equal. Maybe black is a microscopic bit better, but basically this should probably be a draw. So I'd rather have black, but white's rook and two pawns are probably enough for the two minor pieces. So I would say it's a more dangerous position for white than for black, but ultimately it should be a draw. Okay, well that's a lot to see and to assess properly, especially when you think of all the complications that are present here. So white played f takes e5. If d takes e5, there would be the same response, and black would be much better in either case. So Reshevsky played f takes e5, and now, boom, knight d takes e5. Okay, he takes, and what's the big idea here? Well, very nice follow-up blow from Viganian. Bishop to h4 check. Alright, the king has no moves. If he plays, well, it does have one move, taking the bishop, but nowhere else. If he plays knight takes, then queen f2 is mate. So it's very easy to find white's move here. It's king takes h4. Okay, well now what? I mean, black is down two pieces, and it's beautiful to see the king on h4, but what do? If you play queen f2 check, for instance, then knight g3, queen takes g2, and bishop to f1. And what's black doing? If he plays queen f2, then simply well, let me think. Yeah, rook e2 is, well, no. Queen to queen e2 certainly is not bad. Just trying to find something even better. Well, yeah, just bishop to e3 is also very strong. I mean, it lets the black queen escape, kind of, but white's just up 2 pieces now, and with something like queen takes d5 and then maybe e6, the king can escape to h3. So this looks like a dead end for black. He can play queen takes f3, but he's just down a piece. So this is just dead won for white as well. So queen f2 check is no good, but what else is there? Well, the answer, and of course Viganian had to have seen this before playing e5, and has to see more than that besides, is rook takes f3. So this is a great move. If white takes the rook, then check, king has to come up, check again, and it's mate in no more than 2 moves. If the king goes back, then g5 is the end. If the king goes up, then queen f3, and okay, if the king goes to h4, then queen g4 or queen to h3 is mate. And if the king goes to g6, there are various mates. There's queen f7, there's knight e7, and there's knight e5. Okay, white's only chance here is to use a Novotny, bishop to f5. So it's a move that forces one piece or the other to block the other one's line. Although, actually, the rook on f3 doesn't really have anything to do on the f-file on like f6 or f7 or f8. Anyway, after bishop to f5, rook takes f5, queen d5 check, so it was also a clearance sacrifice, king h8, and now queen to b3. And maybe white has some very small chances to hold here. Okay, they're not great chances, but it's something. It's better than nothing. So white still can make black prove that there's a win here. I think there is a win there, mind you, but it's just that it takes a little work. So in the game, instead, Reshevsky played rook to f1, which certainly makes a lot of sense. It's covering f2, and white still is up a full piece, but black proves that it's a winning position. Queen to b4 check. It's a very good move. And after bishop to f4, the queen goes to e7 check. This forces bishop to g5, and now another queen move to e6. And there are 2 threats. There's queen to g4 check, queen to g4 mate, but also if h3, this doesn't really help because we can play queen h3. Alright, rook takes h3 is, I think, better etiquette. This is just kind of needlessly flashy. But either way, you have this mate in 2. Let me see. Yeah, if rook takes f3, of course, queen g4. If gf3, queen h3. So the only move for white here is, again, this bishop to f5 idea. Okay, rook takes f5, and now, not queen takes f5 because queen takes d5 check, and then queen takes f3 would be winning. So rook f5. Now, if rook takes f5, queen f5, queen d5 check, bishop e6. The thing is, white's not even up any material anymore. Okay, he's up the pawn on e5, but that's disappearing. His queen's under attack. Queen g4 mate is threatened. Maybe h3 followed by h6 followed by g5 is a threat. The e pawn drops, as I said. So this is horrible for white. For instance, if queen f3, queen takes e5. Okay, and now we're going to play rook f8. And if bishop f4, then g5 check is very strong. So it's just a lost position for white. In the game, Reshevsky tried knight to f4. Okay, well, queen takes e5, and believe it or not, after all of that, black is up a pawn now. And the bishop on g5 is in big trouble. So he plays queen to g4, which is a very clumsy move to make, since he's putting the queen opposite this bishop on c8. So black played rook to f7. Maybe queen to d6 is even more accurate, but rook f7 is just fine. Okay, queen to h5. And now a nice move, knight to e7. So threatening knight to f5 check, maybe even threatening, in some cases, rook takes f4. And then knight to g6, though probably not here. Okay, white played g4, and we see another idea too, knight to g6 check. And the point of this, actually, this was a threat last move too. If knight takes g6, queen h2 is mate. So Reshevsky had to bring his king back to g3, but now it's just terrible. So white's knight is badly pinned, and after bishop to d7, okay, the queen goes back. He tried bishop to h6, but this is just a cheap bit for attention. And after rook 8 f8, he resigned. Okay, the bishop is under attack, and the knight is under attack, and this white's king is still bad, and black is up a pawn, as if he didn't need enough assets in the position. So white resigned here, and we saw, this is just the conclusion of an absolute massacre, and of a great player. I mean, Reshevsky was still very, very strong in 1976, so not a bad player at all, but he was just completely demolished here. So this shows the danger that faces white in this kind of position, and as well as being just a very exciting and tactically fun game. So in these lines, I mean, you see all this magnificent pawn chain that white has, but you can see that black can really rip it apart here. And so one of the things is having all this extra space, until you really control with your pieces all the squares behind your pawns, bad things like this can happen. Okay, it's not that this variation is bad for white. I mean, we saw that there were plenty of games where white was doing okay, but it is very dangerous. So always be aware of that. If you play the French, certainly don't be afraid to see this massive V wedge coming from the other side of the board. There are plenty of ways of trying to undermine it. And likewise, if you're white, don't get overconfident. The position can blow up in your face. So I hope you enjoyed this and learned something too, and I will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.